If you kiss him, $100,000 is yours. The sentence landed flat on the table. Not playful, not exaggerated. Nina Carter looked up from her drink and straight at the person who said it. Jess Harper, front desk staff at the same hotel. 32, sharp-tongued, quick-thinking, and the kind of woman who treated life like a series of bets she intended to win, was already watching Nina with a half-smile. "Who?" Nina asked. Jess tilted her chin toward the bar. "The guy in black. Tattoos. Been standing there all night like he owns the place." Nina followed the direction immediately. The man stood out without trying. Tall. Still. No drink in his hand now. No phone. No conversation. Just presence. The sleeves of his dark shirt revealed ink along his forearms, clean lines. Deliberate, not decorative. He didn't look bored. He looked aware. Nina took a sip of her drink, then set it down carefully. "That's not a dare," she said. "That's a setup." Jess leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a private deal. "Relax. No one's actually handing you a check. It's a joke." Nina didn't smile. She kept her eyes on the man for a second longer, then looked back. "I don't do things like that for jokes." Jess raised an eyebrow. "So you do it for money?" Nina didn't hesitate. "If it's legal, I'll do anything for money." The table went quiet, not shocked, just registering that she meant every word. Jess leaned back slightly, studying her. "Anything?" Nina shrugged. "I clean up after people who don't even look at me. I fix problems I didn't create. Smile when they're rude." "You think a kiss is worse than that?" Jess's smile sharpened. "Then prove it." Nina exhaled slowly. No drama, no overthinking. She stood up. "Next time," she said, "make the price real." Jess smirked but didn't stop her. The walk to the bar was direct. Nina didn't rush, didn't hesitate. Up close, the man was larger than she expected, not just in size, but in presence. He hadn't turned yet, but she knew he was aware of her. Men like that always were. She stopped in front of him. "Hey," she said. He turned, gray eyes, focused instantly. No confusion, no curiosity, just attention sharp and controlled. Nina didn't wait. She stepped in and kissed him. Quick, clean, no performance. She pulled back just as fast, already half turning away. "That was the deal," she said, "even if the money's fake." She expected nothing back. Instead, "What did you get out of it?" His voice was low, steady. Not amused, not offended. Nina paused, then turned back to face him fully. "Nothing yet," she said, "but if there had been 100,000 on the table, I'd have taken it." His gaze didn't move. "So that's your price?" Nina met his eyes without hesitation. "My price is simple. If it's legal and it pays, I'll do it." A brief silence settled between them. The noise of the bar faded just enough to make the moment sharper. "You let people decide things for you often?" he asked. Nina shook her head. "No. I decide what's worth it. And this was," he pressed. She gave a faint, dry smile. This was cheap. For a second, nothing changed in his expression. Then something did. Not a smile, not approval, interest. He rested his hand on the bar beside her, close but not touching. "Careful," he said. "People who think everything has a price usually find out the cost is higher than they expected." Nina didn't step back. "That's fine," she replied evenly, "as long as I'm the one choosing to pay." Another pause. Then he stepped back first, giving her space like he had never taken it. "Be careful anyway," he said. Nina held his gaze 1 second longer, then turned and walked back to her table. Jess leaned in immediately. "Well?" Nina picked up her drink. "Done." "And?" Jess pressed. Nina took a sip, her eyes drifting back toward the bar before she could stop herself. "He didn't laugh," she said. Jess frowned. "What does that mean?" Nina didn't answer right away. Across the room, he was still there, still watching her. "Nothing," she said finally. "It doesn't mean anything." But her grip on the glass tightened slightly. And behind her, Victor Moretti didn't look away. Nina told herself she wasn't going to look again. But the moment stretched just enough for instinct to win over intention. And when her eyes drifted back toward the bar, Victor Moretti was already looking at her as if he had been waiting for that exact second. There was no hesitation in him, no shift or adjustment, just the same steady focus that made it feel less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Jess caught it too and leaned closer with a quiet laugh under her breath, the kind that carried curiosity more than humor. "He's still watching you," Jess said, her tone light but observant. "People look," Nina replied, keeping her voice even, though she didn't immediately look away this time. "That's not looking," Jess said, tilting her head slightly, studying Nina instead of him now. "That's choosing." Nina didn't answer because she didn't have a clean response that fit the situation, and before she could redirect the conversation, she felt the shift again. Not from across the room this time, but close, immediate, undeniable. She turned slightly, and Victor was standing beside their table as if he had always intended to end up there. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled, cutting through the noise without needing volume. "I'm fine," Nina said, meeting his gaze without backing down, though the proximity made her more aware of him than she wanted to admit. "You left quickly," he continued. "That was the point," she replied. "It wasn't meant to turn into anything else." There was a brief pause, not awkward, just measured, and then he extended his hand, not forcing the gesture, simply offering it. "Victor," Nina looked at his hand for a moment before taking it, feeling the firm, steady grip that matched everything else about him. "Nina," he repeated her name once. Quieter, as if confirming something internally, then released her hand, without lingering. Jess leaned forward slightly, unable to stay out of it. "I'm Jess," she said with a small grin. "I'm the one who set this up." Victor glanced at her briefly, acknowledging the statement without reacting to it, then returned his attention to Nina. "Do you always follow through like that?" "Only when I decide to," Nina said. "I don't like unfinished things." "Neither do I," he replied, and the way he said it made it sound less like agreement and more like a principle he lived by. Jess shifted in her seat, watching the exchange with open interest, while Nina stayed focused on him, reading his tone more than his words. He didn't move closer, didn't crowd her, but the space between them still felt controlled by him in a way she couldn't quite explain. "You said earlier," he continued, "that if it's legal and it pays, you'll do it." "That's right," Nina said without hesitation. "And if I change the terms," he said, his voice lowering slightly, not for secrecy but for precision, "what happens then?" Nina narrowed her eyes just a fraction. "Depends on the terms." Victor held her gaze, completely steady. "If I offered you double," he said, 200,000 instead of one, would that change your answer?" Jess straightened immediately, eyes widening with interest. But Nina didn't react the way most people would. She didn't laugh, didn't look surprised, didn't ask if he was serious. She simply studied him more carefully now, measuring intent instead of words. "For what exactly?" she asked. Victor didn't rush the answer, and when it came, it was direct, clean, impossible to misinterpret. "Dinner," he said. "Time. A conversation that isn't decided by a dare or a joke. You and me, no audience." Jess let out a quiet breath, clearly trying not to interrupt, while Nina remained still, her expression controlled but sharper now. "That's not how this works," Nina said. "You don't just put a number on something and expect it to mean more." "I didn't say it meant more," Victor replied calmly. "I said it changes the terms." Nina held his gaze, unflinching. "And what exactly are you buying with that?" "Nothing," he said. "That's the point. I'm offering. You decide." There was a subtle shift in the air between them again. Not tension exactly, but something heavier, more deliberate. Nina leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing one arm as she considered him, not the offer, but the way he presented it. "You think money makes this simple," she said. "I think honesty makes it simple," Victor replied. "Money just removes the pretending." Jess couldn't help herself. "That's one way to ask someone out," she muttered. Victor ignored the comment completely, his attention fixed on Nina. "So, I'll ask it clearly," he said. "Have dinner with me. No pressure, no expectations. If you walk away after, that's the end of it." Nina didn't answer immediately. She let the silence sit long enough to make sure it was hers to break, not his to fill. She had heard offers before in her life, smaller ones, messier ones, usually wrapped in something she didn't trust. This felt different, not because of the number, but because he wasn't trying to convince her. "You don't know anything about me," she said finally. "I know enough to ask," he replied. "That's not the same thing," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Another pause followed, quieter this time. Less about tension and more about decision. Nina picked up her glass, took a slow sip, then set it back down with controlled precision. "I don't sell time like that," she said. Victor didn't react negatively, didn't push. "Then don't treat it like a sale," he replied. "Treat it like a choice." Jess leaned back, clearly invested now, but silent, sensing that this wasn't something she should interfere with further. Nina looked at Victor again, really looked this time, past the surface, past the obvious presence and control. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then nothing changes," he said. "You go back to your night. I go back to mine." "And you stop?" she pressed. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, and that, more than anything, made her pause. "Most men don't," she said. "I'm not most men," he replied. That moment lingers, doesn't it? Not the money, but the choice, the pause, the quiet power of walking away. If you were in Nina's place, would you have done the same? Drop a comment right where you're watching this video. I'm genuinely curious how you'd handle it. And if stories like this make you think a little deeper, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Jess let out a quiet laugh under her breath at that, but Nina didn't smile. She held his gaze for one more second, then stood, reaching for her bag. "I have work in the morning," she said, her tone neutral again, resetting the distance between them. Victor stepped back immediately, giving her space without being asked. "Of course." Nina hesitated just long enough to make it clear the moment wasn't entirely dismissed. "I'll think about it," she said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Victor nodded once, accepting it exactly as it was. "That's enough." Jess stood quickly, grabbing her own things, her eyes moving between them like she was watching a scene she didn't want to miss. As they turned to leave, Victor's voice followed, calm and certain. "Nina." She glanced back. "I don't make offers I don't intend to keep," he said. Nina held his gaze, unreadable for a moment, then gave a small nod before turning away and walking toward the door. Outside, the air felt cooler, clearer, and Jess didn't wait even 2 steps before speaking. 200,000, she said, half laughing. "Who even says that like it's normal?" Nina adjusted her coat, her expression steady but thoughtful. "Someone who doesn't think it's a big deal." Jess looked at her. "Is it?" Nina glanced back once, through the glass, catching the outline of him still standing where they left him. "No," she said quietly. "That's the part that isn't normal." Nina didn't answer Victor that night, and for the first time in a long time, that decision stayed with her longer than it should have. It followed her home, sat with her in the quiet of her small apartment, and lingered in the silence that usually helped her reset. She placed her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and stood there for a moment, without moving, replaying the conversation not for what was said, but for what wasn't. $200,000 had been mentioned like it meant nothing, like it wasn't enough to change someone's life, and somehow that made it more unsettling than impressive. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of the thought. "Jess." "Of course. Tell me you're going," the message read. Nina exhaled lightly, typing back without overthinking. "I didn't say yes." The reply came almost instantly. "You didn't say no either." Nina set the phone down without answering. That was the part that bothered her, not the money, not even Victor, but the fact that she hadn't closed the door completely. She walked to the sink, turned on the water, and let it run for a second longer than necessary. Routine usually helped her clear her head. Tonight, it didn't. The next morning started like every other shift, early, structured, predictable. Nina moved through the hotel floors with practiced efficiency, her cart rolling quietly behind her as she entered room after room, restoring order for people she would never meet. The work itself didn't bother her. It was the pattern of it, the repetition without recognition, the understanding that, no matter how well she did it, nothing about her position would change. Around mid-morning, she stepped into the staff hallway just as raised voices cut through the usual quiet. It wasn't loud enough to draw a crowd, but it was enough to make people notice and then pretend not to. "I said I didn't touch it," a woman's voice insisted, tight with frustration. Nina slowed slightly, recognizing the voice. Emily. Younger than most of them, still new enough to think fairness mattered. The manager stood in front of her, arms crossed, expression already decided. "The client says it was missing after you cleaned the room. That's all I need to know. That doesn't mean I took it," Emily said. her voice shaking now but holding. "It means you're responsible," he replied, not raising his voice, not needing to. "We can do this the easy way, or we can make it official." Nina stopped completely now, just out of direct view. She had seen this before. Not once, not twice, but enough to know how it ended. Someone had to take the blame. It was always easier if it was one of them. Emily glanced around, looking for support, but no one stepped forward. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew better. Marlene's words from the day before came back, clear and exact. Justice doesn't always mean fair. Nina stepped forward then, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. "Was there a camera?" she asked. The manager turned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Excuse me?" "In the hallway," Nina said calmly, "or inside the suite." "There's no camera inside guest rooms," he replied sharply. "Then you don't know what happened," she said. A brief silence followed, heavier than the conversation deserved. The manager studied her, irritation shifting into something more measured. "Are you involved in this?" "No," Nina said, "but she's saying she didn't do it." "That's not proof," he replied. Nina held his gaze. "Neither is an assumption." Another pause. Then he exhaled, clearly deciding this wasn't worth escalating in the moment. "I'll review it," he said, though his tone suggested the decision was already made. "Both of you, get back to work." Emily nodded quickly, relief mixed with uncertainty, while Nina didn't move right away. She knew what review it meant. Delay. Then resolution that favored the guest. As she walked away, Emily caught up with her. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," Nina replied. "Thank you," Emily added. Nina gave a small nod but didn't respond further. Gratitude didn't fix the system. It just made it easier to survive inside it. By the time her shift ended, the weight of the day had replaced the thoughts from the night before, but not entirely. As she stepped outside, the city felt louder than usual, traffic heavier, people moving faster. She adjusted her coat and started walking, letting the rhythm of the street pull her forward. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Nina slowed, staring at the screen for a second before opening the message. "Dinner, tomorrow, 7 p.m. No pressure, you decide." No name. No signature. It didn't need one. Nina read it twice, then locked her phone without replying. She kept walking, but her pace had changed, just slightly. Later that evening, Jess showed up at her apartment uninvited, which was normal enough that Nina didn't question it. She opened the door, already knowing what the conversation would be. "You got the message, didn't you?" Jess asked, stepping inside like she belonged there. Nina closed the door behind her. "Yes." "And?" Jess pressed. "I haven't answered." Jess turned, studying her. "Why?" Nina shrugged, moving toward the kitchen. "Because I don't have to." Jess followed, leaning against the counter. "That's not a reason. That's avoidance." Nina poured herself a glass of water. "It's control." Jess crossed her arms. "You think saying no is control?" "No," Nina said, taking a sip. "Deciding when to say yes is." Jess watched her for a second, then nodded slowly. "So what are you waiting for?" Nina set the glass down. "To see if it still feels like a choice tomorrow." Jess let out a quiet breath, half amused, half impressed. "You realize most people wouldn't hesitate." "Most people aren't in my position," Nina replied. "And what position is that?" Jess asked. Nina met her eyes. "The kind where nothing is ever free, even when it looks like it is." Jess didn't argue with that. Instead, she pushed off the counter. "Well," she said, "if you don't go, you're going to think about it anyway." Nina didn't respond, because she already knew that was true. The next morning came faster than she expected. Work felt heavier, slower, like her attention was split between what she was doing and what she hadn't decided yet. By the time her shift ended, the message was still unanswered, but the silence felt louder now. At 6:12 p.m., her phone buzzed again. "I'll be there at 7. If you don't come, I won't contact you again." This time there was no mistaking the finality in it. Nina stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the dark glass. One decision, that was all it was. She looked at the time again, then she moved. Not fast, not rushed, just certain. Because whatever this was, she wasn't going to let it be decided by hesitation. Nina arrived at 6:57. Not because she was trying to impress him, but because she refused to be late for something she had chosen. The restaurant was quieter than she expected, not empty, but controlled. Low lighting, muted conversations, the kind of place where people didn't raise their voices because they didn't need to. She stepped inside, adjusting her coat slightly, aware of how different this felt from the bar the night before. There was no chaos here, no distractions, just intention. The host looked up. "Good evening. Reservation for Nina," she said, keeping her tone steady. There was a brief pause, just long enough for the host's expression to shift slightly. Recognition, maybe not of her, but of the name in context. "Of course," he said. "Right this way." Nina followed him through the room, noticing the details without lingering on them. Well-dressed guests, older couples, quiet business conversations. People who lived in a different rhythm. As they moved toward the back, she saw him. Victor was already there, seated, waiting, not checking his phone, not distracted, just present, like he had been in the bar, except here it felt different, more controlled, more deliberate. He stood when she approached. That small gesture caught her attention more than anything else. "Nina," he said. "Victor," she replied. He pulled out the chair for her, then returned to his seat once she was settled. No rush, no unnecessary movement. The waiter approached almost immediately, as if the timing had been arranged. "Water?" Victor asked. "That's fine," Nina said. He nodded, and the order was placed without discussion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not awkward, just quiet. Nina let her eyes settle on him properly this time. No bar lighting, no noise to blur details. He looked the same, but clearer. The tattoos, the posture, the stillness, it all fit together in a way that made sense now. "You came," he said. "You gave me a deadline," she replied. "I gave you a choice," he corrected. Nina tilted her head slightly. "With an expiration." Victor didn't argue that. "I don't leave things open-ended." "I noticed," she said. The waiter returned with water, setting the glasses down gently before stepping away again. Nina took a sip, more to give herself a second than out of thirst. "Let's be clear," she said, placing the glass down. "This isn't about the money." Victor's gaze didn't shift. "I know." "Then why mention it?" she asked. "Because it removes confusion," he said. "You said you value things that are clear. So I made it clear." Nina considered that for a second. "Or you made it easier to say yes." "That too," he admitted. A small pause followed, not tense, just measured. "So," Nina continued, "what exactly do you do, Victor?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his hands resting loosely on the table. "I run businesses," he said. "That's vague," Nina replied. "Yes," he said simply. Nina didn't smile. "I don't like vague." Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Then ask what you actually want to know." Nina held his gaze. "Are you dangerous?" The question landed clean. No hesitation, no softening. Victor didn't react outwardly, but something in his expression sharpened just slightly. "I can be," he said. Nina didn't look away. That's not an answer people usually give on a first date. "This isn't a usual situation," he replied. "That's becoming obvious," she said. Another pause, the kind that carried more meaning than the words around it. The waiter returned to take their order, and Nina chose something simple without thinking too much about it. Victor did the same. When the waiter left, the quiet returned, but it felt different now, more grounded. "Why me?" Nina asked. Victor didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because you didn't act like you wanted something from me," he said. Nina frowned slightly. "I literally said I'd do anything for money." "You said you would if it was legal and worth it," he corrected. "That's not the same as wanting something from me specifically." Nina leaned back, considering that. "So this is curiosity?" "Yes," he said. "About what?" she asked. "You," he replied. Nina let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. "That's a risk." "I know," he said. "And you're fine with that?" she pressed. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," he answered. The food arrived, breaking the moment just enough to reset the rhythm. Nina picked up her fork, giving herself something to do while she processed the conversation. "You're used to control," she said after a moment. "Yes," Victor replied. "And this," she gestured lightly between them, "you can't control." Victor watched her for a second, then nodded. "No." Nina took a bite, then set her fork down again. That doesn't bother you? It does, he said. That's why it matters. The honesty in that answer caught her off guard more than anything else he had said. Most people would try to control it anyway, she said. Most people fail when they do, he replied. Nina studied him again, more carefully now. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? He asked. She shrugged slightly. Someone louder, more obvious. And you're disappointed? He asked. No, she said. Just adjusting. Victor's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close enough to soften the edge. Good. The conversation continued, moving through safer topics at first. Work, routines, small details that built a clearer picture. Nina spoke about the hotel, about the repetition, about the way people treated staff like part of the furniture. Victor listened, not interrupting, not offering empty reassurances. At one point, Nina said, "People like you don't usually notice people like me." Victor didn't hesitate. "I noticed you. That doesn't explain why," she replied. He looked at her steadily. "Because you didn't pretend to be anything else." Nina held his gaze, feeling the weight of that more than she expected. Outside, the city moved as it always did, but inside the restaurant, time felt slower, more deliberate. When dinner ended, Victor didn't rush to stand, didn't check his phone, didn't signal for anything. He simply looked at her. "This was the part where you decide," he said. "Decide what?" Nina asked. "If this continues," he replied. Nina leaned back slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. "You move fast. I move clearly," he corrected. Nina let out a quiet breath, her eyes not leaving his. "And if I say no, then this ends here," he said. "No pressure, no follow-up." "And if I say yes?" she asked. Victor's gaze didn't waver. "Then we see where it goes." A pause stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with choice. Nina nodded once, slow and deliberate. "One more dinner," she said. Victor didn't smile like he had won anything. He simply nodded. "One more." As they stood, he stepped aside slightly, giving her space to move first. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, grounding. Nina pulled her coat tighter, then looked at him. "You're still not telling me everything." "No," he said. She studied him for a second. "Next time?" Victor met her gaze. "Next time." Nina nodded, turning to leave. But this time she didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She felt like she had stepped into it. The second dinner didn't happen immediately, and that was the first sign that this wasn't going to follow any pattern Nina recognized. Victor didn't text the next morning, didn't send anything in the afternoon, and didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. At first, Nina told herself she preferred it that way. No pressure, no distractions, no one trying to pull her attention away from the life she already understood. But by the third day, the absence of a message had become something she noticed, not because she expected it, but because she had started to anticipate it without meaning to. Work filled most of that space. It always did. The hotel moved at the same pace regardless of what was happening outside of it, and Nina slipped back into routine with the same precision she always had. Sheets folded, surfaces wiped, rooms reset. Everything returned to neutral before the next guest arrived. It was a system designed to erase traces, and Nina had become very good at it. That morning, she was assigned to a different floor, one usually reserved for long-term guests. Fewer turnovers, more consistency, but also more familiarity with the people who stayed there. Some of them nodded when they saw her. Most didn't remember her name. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she noticed the door to suite 1712 was slightly open. Not wide enough to invite entry, but enough to suggest someone had left in a hurry. She paused, knocking lightly. "Housekeeping," she called. No response. She pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The room was in partial disarray, not the usual kind she dealt with. Drawers open, a chair pulled slightly out of place, a glass left half full on the table. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't careless either. It looked interrupted. Nina moved carefully, not touching anything yet. Her eyes scanned the room automatically, picking up details the way she had trained herself to. That was when she noticed the folder on the desk. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't meant to be seen casually either. a corner of paper slightly exposed, enough to catch attention. She hesitated, then stepped closer. The name on the top page was familiar, not because she knew the person, but because she had heard it recently. Moretti. Nina's fingers hovered for a second before she slid the paper out just enough to read more clearly. It wasn't a simple document. Numbers, names, locations. Not hotel-related, not anything she recognized from her work. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps. She slid the paper back exactly where it had been and stepped away from the desk just as the door opened behind her. "You're not assigned to this room." The voice was calm, but firm. Nina turned. The man standing in the doorway wasn't hotel staff. That much was obvious immediately. Dark suit, posture straight, eyes scanning her in a way that wasn't casual. "The door was open," Nina said evenly. "I knocked. No one answered." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. "That doesn't mean you come in." Nina didn't move back. "It's my job to check." A brief silence followed. The man studied her, not aggressively, but thoroughly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nina," she replied. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something. Then he stepped past her, moving directly to the desk. His attention shifted there, scanning quickly, checking. Nina noticed. He was looking for something. After a moment, he turned back. "You can go," he said. No apology, no explanation. Nina didn't argue. She picked up her cart and walked out, her pace steady, her expression unchanged. But once she turned the corner, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Later that afternoon, as she sat in the staff break room, the noise of casual conversation around her felt distant. She replayed the moment in her head, not the confrontation, but the document. The name, the pattern, Moretti. Victor hadn't lied, but he hadn't told her anything either. Jess dropped into the chair across from her, setting her coffee down with a small thud. "You look like you're thinking too hard," she said. "I saw something today," Nina replied. Jess raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." Nina leaned back slightly, choosing her words carefully. "A room I wasn't assigned to, papers I wasn't supposed to notice." Jess watched her more closely now. "And the name Moretti was on them," Nina said. Jess's expression changed, just enough to matter. "You're sure?" "Yes." A pause stretched between them. "That's not normal," Jess said finally. "No," Nina agreed. "It's not." Jess leaned forward slightly. "So what are you going to do?" Nina didn't answer immediately. She reached for her water, took a sip, then set it back down. "Nothing yet." Jess frowned. "That doesn't sound like you." "I don't move without understanding what I'm stepping into," Nina replied. Jess studied her for a second, then nodded slowly. "And him?" Nina's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question. "He said he runs businesses people don't want to see." Jess let out a quiet breath. "That's not a business description, that's a warning." Nina didn't argue. That evening, Nina walked home instead of taking the subway. The distance helped her think, or at least slowed everything down enough to make the thoughts clearer. By the time she reached her building, her phone buzzed. "Victor, tomorrow, my place, 7 p.m. I'll answer your questions." No extra words, no explanation. Nina stared at the message longer than she intended to. Jess's voice echoed in her head. "That's not a business description. That's a warning." Nina unlocked her door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. The apartment felt the same as always. Small, quiet, predictable, safe. She placed her phone on the table, then picked it up again. "You already know I have questions," she typed. The response came almost immediately. "I know." Nina stared at the screen for a moment, then typed again. "And if I don't like the answers?" This time, there was a pause. Then you walk away." Nina read it twice. No pressure. No attempt to convince her otherwise. Just a line. She set the phone down slowly, her reflection faint in the dark screen. For the first time since she met him, the situation felt less like curiosity and more like a decision with weight. And this time, she knew exactly what she was stepping toward. Not a mystery, not a game, something real, something that didn't erase itself when the room was reset. Nina didn't rush into the decision the next day, but she didn't avoid it either. The message from Victor stayed at the front of her mind, not as pressure, but as something unfinished that needed resolution. She moved through her shift with the same discipline as always. But now every detail felt sharper, more connected. The room from yesterday, the document, the man in the suit. None of it felt separate anymore. It all pointed in one direction. And by the time her shift ended, Nina had already decided she was going. At 6:40, she stood in front of her mirror, not changing outfits repeatedly, not trying to impress, just making sure she looked like herself. Clean lines, simple clothes, nothing that suggested she was stepping into something unfamiliar. If Victor was going to tell her the truth, she wanted to hear it as Nina, not as someone trying to fit into his world. Her phone buzzed at 6:45. "I'm downstairs." Nina glanced at the screen, then grabbed her coat. The hallway outside her apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comforted her. Tonight, it just made everything feel more deliberate. She stepped outside and saw the car immediately. Not flashy, but precise. Black, clean, parked exactly where it needed to be. Victor stood beside it, not leaning, not distracted, waiting. He looked different here, not because of what he wore, but because of where he stood. This wasn't a bar or a restaurant. This was his space, his timing, his control. "Nina," he said as she approached. "Victor." He opened the passenger door for her without saying anything else. Nina paused for half a second, then got in. The interior was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from design, not absence. Victor got in on the driver's side. "You drive yourself?" Nina asked. "Yes." "That's new," she said. "I don't always delegate everything," he replied. The car moved smoothly into traffic. No music. No unnecessary conversation. Just the rhythm of the city passing by. Nina watched the streets shift, from crowded intersections to quieter blocks, from noise to space. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My place," he said. Nina nodded once, not questioning it further. She had already chosen to come. The building he pulled up to wasn't what she expected. No guards at the entrance. No obvious security. Just a clean, modern structure, with subtle design and controlled lighting. It didn't scream power, it suggested it. Victor parked and stepped out, opening her door again. Inside, the lobby was quiet. The kind of place where conversations stayed low, and people didn't look twice. Unless there was a reason, they took the elevator up in silence. "You said you'd answer my questions," Nina said as the doors closed. "I will," Victor replied. "And you won't avoid anything?" she pressed. "No." The elevator opened onto a private floor. Victor led her inside. The apartment was exactly what she didn't expect again. Not dark, not cold, not filled with excess. Clean lines, neutral tones, carefully chosen details. It felt lived in, but controlled. Like everything had a place and nothing existed by accident. "This is not what I imagined," Nina said. "What did you imagine?" Victor asked. "Something louder," she replied. "I prefer quiet," he said. Nina stepped further inside, taking in the space without touching anything. "Quiet doesn't mean simple," she said. "No," Victor agreed. He moved toward the kitchen, pouring water into a glass and handing it to her. She took it, noticing again the consistency in his actions. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the living area. Nina sat, placing the glass on the table in front of her. Victor didn't sit immediately. He stood for a moment, looking at her like he was deciding where to begin. "You saw something yesterday," he said. Nina's eyes lifted to his. "You already know that?" "Yes." "Then start there," she said. Victor sat across from her, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting loosely together. "The name you saw," he said, "is mine." "I figured that out," Nina replied. "It wasn't meant for you to see," he continued. "That's obvious," she said. "What isn't obvious is what it means." Victor didn't rush the answer. "It means my work isn't limited to what I told you," he said. "You said you run businesses," Nina replied. "I do," he said. "That doesn't explain the kind of documents I saw," she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. A pause settled between them, heavier now, more real. So explain it, Nina said. Victor held her gaze, steady and direct. Some of what I manage operates outside the systems you're familiar with, he said. Nina didn't look away. Illegal? Yes. The word landed clean. Nina leaned back slightly, processing, but not surprised. And the people involved? She asked. They work for me, he said. The man I saw in the room, Nina continued. He wasn't hotel staff. No, Victor said. And he was looking for something, she added. Yes. Nina exhaled slowly, her fingers resting against the edge of the table. So I walked into something I wasn't supposed to see, involving someone I had dinner with. That's accurate, Victor said. And you still asked me here, she said. Yes. Why? Nina asked. Victor didn't hesitate. Because I don't want you to misunderstand what you're dealing with. Nina let out a quiet breath, something between frustration and clarity. You should have said that before. I needed to know you would ask, he replied. Nina frowned slightly. That's not how trust works. No, Victor said. But it's how honesty does. Another silence followed, this one heavier. Nina stood, walking a few steps toward the window, looking out at the city below. The lights were the same ones she saw every night. But from here they looked different. Smaller. Controlled. You're asking me to stay in a situation I don't fully understand, she said. I'm asking you to decide if you want to, Victor replied. Nina turned back to face him. That's not the same thing. No, he said. It isn't. Nina studied him for a long moment. Are you in danger? She asked. Victor's expression didn't change, but his answer came slower this time. Sometimes. And now? She pressed. Yes. Nina nodded once, absorbing that. And me? Victor met her eyes. Only if you stay close to it. The honesty in that answer didn't reassure her. It clarified things. Nina walked back to the table, stopping just short of sitting again. You said I could walk away, she said. You can, Victor replied. And if I do, this ends, she continued. Yes. Nina held his gaze, steady, weighing the choice in front of her. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was consequence. And if I stay? She asked. Victor didn't move. Then you understand what you're stepping into. Nina's lips pressed together briefly, then she nodded once, more to herself than to him. I'm not deciding tonight, she said. I didn't expect you to, Victor replied. Nina picked up her coat, her movements calm, controlled. But now I know what I'm deciding about. Victor stood as she moved toward the door, giving her space without stopping her. Nina, he said. She paused, turning slightly. I won't lie to you, he said. Nina held his gaze for a second longer. Then don't wait so long to tell the truth next time. Victor nodded once. Nina stepped out into the hallway, the door closing quietly behind her. For the first time since this started, she didn't feel pulled toward him. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something she could either walk away from or step deeper into. And now, the choice actually mattered. Nina didn't go straight home after leaving Victor's apartment. She walked, not because she needed to clear her head, but because she needed to feel the ground under her decisions again. The city was the same as always. Traffic moving in patterns that never really stopped. People passing without noticing each other. Conversations blending into noise. It was familiar, predictable. And for the first time since she met him, she understood exactly what she was comparing his world against. By the time she reached her building, her phone buzzed. Yes. You went, didn't you? Nina unlocked her door, stepping inside before replying. Yes. 3 dots appeared immediately. And? Nina set her coat down slowly, then typed. He told the truth. Jess's response came faster this time. That doesn't sound reassuring. Nina stared at the screen for a second before typing again. It's not supposed to be. She set the phone down after that, not wanting to turn it into a conversation yet. Some things didn't translate well when spoken too quickly. And this was one of them. The next morning, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Nina moved through her shift with the same discipline, but her awareness had changed. Every hallway, every guest, every quiet exchange between staff she noticed more now. Not because she was looking for trouble, but because she knew it existed. Around mid-shift, she stepped into the supply room to restock, and that was when she noticed it again. The same man from the day before, the one in the suit. He wasn't pretending to belong this time. He stood near the end of the hallway, not blocking anything, not interfering, just present. Watching. Nina didn't approach him. She didn't acknowledge him either. She finished what she was doing and moved past him like he was part of the building. But as she walked by, he spoke. "You shouldn't be involved." Nina stopped, just enough to respond without turning fully. "I'm not. That's not how it works," he said. Nina turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Then explain how it does." He studied her for a moment, like he was deciding whether the conversation was worth continuing. "People like him don't exist in isolation," he said. "Everything around them becomes part of it." Nina's expression didn't change. "I didn't choose that." "No," he said, "but you're still close enough to it." Nina held his gaze for a second longer. "Then maybe he should be more careful." The man didn't respond to that. He simply stepped aside, letting her pass. The conversation stayed with her longer than she expected. That evening, Jess showed up again, this time without knocking. Nina didn't question it. "Okay," Jess said, dropping her bag onto the chair. "You're not getting out of this one." "What did he say?" Nina poured herself a glass of water before answering. "He told me exactly what he does." Jess crossed her arms. "And?" "He's not clean," Nina said. Jess let out a quiet breath. "That's one way to put it." "He didn't lie," Nina continued. "He didn't try to make it sound better than it is." Jess studied her closely now. "And you're still talking about him?" Nina didn't deny it. "Because now I understand what the decision actually is." Jess shook her head slightly. "No. You understand what the risk is?" "That too," Nina said. Jess leaned forward. "So what are you going to do?" Nina didn't answer immediately. She sat down across from Jess, her posture steady, her tone controlled. "I'm not walking into something blindly," she said, "but I'm also not pretending I didn't already step into it." Jess frowned. "That sounds like you're already leaning one way." Nina met her eyes. "It sounds like I'm not afraid to see something through." Jess held her gaze for a second, then leaned back. "You always do this," she said. "You don't back away once you decide something matters." Nina didn't respond, because that was true. Later that night, Nina's phone buzzed again. "Victor, are you okay?" She stared at the message for a second. Simple. Direct. Not controlling. Not demanding. "Yes," she replied. A pause. Then, "You left without finishing the conversation." Nina typed back. There wasn't anything left to say. Another pause. Longer this time. "Then I'll ask something instead," he wrote. Nina waited. "Do you trust me enough to come back?" The question was different from anything he had asked before. It wasn't about curiosity, or control, or even clarity. It was about something harder to define. Nina read it twice before responding. "I trust that you told me the truth," she typed. "That's not the same as trusting you." The reply came slower this time. "I didn't expect it to be." Nina leaned back slightly, considering. Then she typed, "Then what exactly are you asking?" Victor's response came after a few seconds. "I'm asking if you're willing to see where this goes, knowing exactly what it is." Nina stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the glass. The question wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't about a dinner, or a conversation, or even curiosity. It was about stepping further into something that had already proven it wouldn't stay simple. Her phone buzzed again before she could answer. Another message. "If the answer is no, say it now," Victor wrote. "And I'll leave you alone." Nina's fingers hovered over the screen. Jess's words echoed in her mind. "You don't back away once you decide something matters." The man in the hallway. The document. The truth Victor didn't hide. Everything pointed in one direction. Nina took a slow breath, then typed, "I'm not saying no." She didn't send anything else. The reply came almost immediately. "That's enough." Nina set the phone down, her pulse steady but heavier than before. This wasn't hesitation anymore. This was movement, not fast, not reckless, but forward. And for the first time, she understood that staying in this situation didn't mean waiting for something to happen. It meant being part of what happened next. Nina didn't expect anything to change immediately after her message, but something did, not around her, not in the city, but in the way she moved through it. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted into something more defined. She had made a decision without fully closing the door, and that meant whatever came next would be a consequence of that choice, not an accident. The next morning, She woke up earlier than usual, not because she had to, but because her mind refused to stay still. She lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last message. That's enough. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't relief. It was acknowledgement. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Victor. Good morning. Nina stared at it for a second before replying. You're up early. I'm always up early, he wrote back. That answer felt consistent, predictable in a way that made sense. Nina sat up slowly, running a hand through her hair. Do you ever stop working? A pause. Then, not in the way most people do. She read that twice, then set the phone down without responding. Some questions didn't have simple answers, and she was starting to understand that with him, the simplest version of anything was rarely the full truth. Work felt different again that day. Not because anything had changed, but because she was now aware of how much she didn't know about the system she was part of. The hotel wasn't just a place people passed through. It was connected to something larger, something she had only glimpsed. By midday, the tension she had been carrying quietly found a direction. Emily approached her near the service corridor, her expression tight. They're writing me up, she said, her voice low. Nina stopped. For what? For the missing item, Emily replied. They said they reviewed it. Nina's jaw tightened slightly. That's not proof. I know, Emily said, but they don't care. Nina looked at her for a second, then asked, Did you take it? Emily shook her head immediately. No. Nina nodded once. Then don't admit anything. They said it'll be easier if I do, Emily added. Nina held her gaze. Easier for them. Emily hesitated. What do I do? Nina exhaled slowly. You stand your ground. Emily looked uncertain, but she nodded. As Nina walked away, the thought came back, sharper this time. Justice doesn't always mean fair. It means someone wins. And right now, Emily was the one expected to lose. That evening, Nina didn't go straight home. She didn't plan it, but her steps carried her toward a quieter part of the city, away from the noise. Her phone buzzed again. Victor. Dinner. Tonight. No pressure. Nina stopped walking, reading the message under the dim streetlight. This time, there was no deadline attached, no final line, just an offer. She typed back, You said no pressure. I meant it, he replied. Nina stared at the screen for a second longer, then typed, Where? The address came through immediately. She didn't hesitate this time. The restaurant was smaller than the last one, more private, less formal. When she walked in, Victor was already there again, standing this time, his attention shifting to her the moment she entered. You came, he said. I said I wasn't saying no, Nina replied. He nodded once, accepting that without pushing further. They sat, the rhythm familiar now, but the weight behind it heavier. Nina didn't wait this time. I saw someone again today, she said. Victor's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. Where? At work, she replied. Same man, the one from the room. Victor leaned back slightly, processing. Did he speak to you? Yes. What did he say? Victor asked. Nina held his gaze. That I shouldn't be involved. A brief silence followed. And what did you say? Victor asked. That maybe you should be more careful, she replied. For the first time, something close to a reaction crossed his face. Not surprise. Something closer to recognition. That wasn't a wrong answer, he said. It wasn't meant to be, Nina replied. The waiter approached, but neither of them spoke until the order was placed, and the space was theirs again. You're being watched now, Victor said. Nina didn't flinch. I figured. You're not part of it, he continued. But proximity matters. Nina leaned forward slightly. Then why are we still sitting here? Victor met her eyes directly. Because I'm not going to pretend you don't already know enough to decide. Nina studied him carefully. And if I decide this isn't worth it, then you walk away, he said, and I make sure nothing follows you. The certainty in his voice made that statement feel less like reassurance and more like a guarantee. And if I stay? She asked. Victor didn't answer immediately this time. He watched her, measuring the weight of the question. Then things change, he said. How? Nina pressed. You won't be able to pretend this is separate from your life, he replied. Nina leaned back, absorbing that. It already isn't. Victor nodded once. That's why this matters. The food arrived, but neither of them focused on it immediately. Someone at my job is being blamed for something she didn't do, Nina said after a moment. Victor listened. They expect her to admit it because it's easier, she continued. And will she? He asked. Not if I can help it, Nina replied. Victor's gaze held hers. You don't like unfair systems. No, Nina said. I don't like people losing because they don't have a choice. Victor nodded slightly. Most systems work that way. That doesn't make them right, Nina replied. No, he agreed. It just makes them stable. A quiet settled between them again, but this time it felt heavier, more aligned. You operate in something like that, Nina said. Yes, Victor replied. And you're okay with it? She asked. No, he said. The answer came without hesitation. Nina blinked slightly. Then why stay in it? Victor held her gaze. Because leaving it changes more than just my position. Nina didn't respond immediately. She picked up her glass, taking a slow sip, then set it back down. You're not as comfortable with it as you pretend, she said. Victor didn't deny it. And you're not as disconnected from it as you want to be, he replied. Nina met his eyes again, steady. That's fair, she said. The conversation shifted after that, but not away from the truth, just around it. By the time they stood to leave, the air between them felt different again. Not lighter, but clearer. Outside, the night had settled into a quiet rhythm. Nina looked at him. You said things change if I stay. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then don't expect me to stand still. Victor's expression softened slightly, just enough to register. I wouldn't, he said. Nina nodded once, turning to leave, but this time the choice felt less uncertain, not because the risk was gone, but because she understood it, and chose to keep moving forward anyway. The next few days didn't slow down, and that was the first real test of Nina's decision. Nothing dramatic happened at once, no sudden danger, no obvious shift. But everything felt connected now, like she had stepped into a current that moved beneath the surface whether she noticed it or not. She went to work, she moved through her routine, but she wasn't just seeing tasks anymore. She was seeing patterns, people, reactions that used to pass by unnoticed. Emily's situation escalated faster than expected. By midweek, the management had pushed the issue further, calling her into a formal meeting. Nina wasn't inside the room, but she saw Emily afterward, standing near the lockers, her eyes red but her posture still upright. They want me to sign something, Emily said quietly when Nina approached. Did you? Nina asked. Emily shook her head. No. But they said if I don't, it gets worse. Nina studied her for a moment, then asked, Do you trust yourself? Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, Nina said, her voice steady. Do you know you didn't do it? Yes, Emily said, without hesitation. Then don't let them decide your version of the truth, Nina replied. Emily swallowed, the fear still there but steadier now. And if they fire me? Nina didn't answer immediately. She understood the weight of that question more than Emily did. Losing the job wasn't just losing income. It was losing stability, routine, a place in the system. Then at least it won't be because you gave them permission to blame you, Nina said. Emily nodded slowly, holding on to that. Later that day, Nina found herself thinking about Victor again, not because she was distracted, but because the situation in front of her mirrored something he had said. Most systems work that way. It just makes them stable. She didn't like that truth, but she couldn't deny it either. That evening, Nina didn't wait for a message. She sent one first. Are you busy? The reply came quickly. I can make time. Nina stared at the screen for a second before typing. I need to ask you something. A pause. Then ask. She hesitated, then wrote. If someone is being forced into taking the blame for something they didn't do, what happens if they refuse? This time, the pause was longer. Depends on who's asking them to take the blame, Victor replied. Nina leaned back against the wall, her fingers still on the phone. Someone with authority. Another pause. Then refusing has a cost, he said. Nina read it twice. And accepting it also has a cost, he replied. Nina exhaled slowly. So either way, they lose. Yes, Victor said. The difference is what they lose. Nina stared at that answer, something in it settling deeper than she expected. What would you do? The response came after a few seconds. I don't answer questions like that without context. Nina hesitated, then typed. It's someone at my job. A longer pause this time. Then the system expects them to fold, he replied, and it expects no one to stand beside them. Nina's grip tightened slightly around the phone. And if someone does? Then the system adjusts, Victor said, or it pushes back harder. Nina looked at the message, then typed one more question. And you? There was no immediate response. When it came, it was shorter. I don't like systems that rely on silence. Nina didn't reply after that. She didn't need to. She already understood what he meant. The next morning, Nina walked into work with a different kind of clarity. Not confidence, not certainty, but direction. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was choosing. The meeting with Emily was scheduled again, this time with a higher-level manager present. Nina wasn't invited, but she didn't wait to be. She knocked once and stepped inside before anyone could stop her. "This is a private meeting," the manager said immediately. "I know," Nina replied, stepping forward anyway. "But you're making a decision that affects more than just this room." Emily looked at her, surprised but not stopping her. The senior manager leaned back slightly. "And you are?" "Nina Carter," she said. "Housekeeping." A pause. Then, "And why are you here, Nina?" "Because you don't have proof," she said. "You have an assumption." The room went quiet. "We reviewed the situation," the manager replied, controlled but firm. "You reviewed what was convenient," Nina said, "not what was accurate." The tension shifted instantly. "You're overstepping," he said. "Am I?" Nina asked calmly. "Or am I saying what everyone else already knows but won't say?" Emily sat still, her hands clenched slightly in her lap. The senior manager studied Nina for a long moment, then said, "This doesn't concern you." "It does," Nina replied, "because if you can do this to her, you can do it to any of us." Silence followed that. Not empty, but heavy with recognition. The senior manager finally leaned forward. "Do you have evidence?" "No," Nina said, "but neither do you." Another pause. Then something shifted. "Review it again," the senior manager said to the other manager. "Properly." It wasn't a victory. It wasn't resolution. But it was enough to stop the immediate outcome. Nina stepped back, not pushing further. As she walked out, Emily followed her into the hallway. "You didn't have to do that," Emily said again, but this time it sounded different. "I know," Nina replied. Emily looked at her, something steadier in her expression now. "Thank you." Nina nodded once. That evening, her phone buzzed again. "Victor." You stood beside her. Nina frowned slightly, typing back. "How do you know that?" Pause. "I pay attention," he replied. Nina stared at the message, then typed, "That's not an answer." "No," he said, "but it's the truth." Nina leaned back, considering. "You said systems rely on silence." "Yes." "I don't," she replied. "I know," he said. That answer landed differently than the others. Nina hesitated, then typed one more message. "This changes things." The response came almost immediately. "Yes." Nina looked at the screen, her reflection faint but steady. "Then we don't go back to simple," she wrote. "No," Victor replied. "We don't." Nina set the phone down slowly. For the first time since this started, she wasn't standing at the edge anymore. She had stepped fully into it, not because she was pulled, not because she didn't understand the risk, but because she chose to move forward, knowing exactly what it meant. And that choice, more than anything else, was what made it real. This story reminds us that life rarely offers clean choices between right and wrong, only decisions between different kinds of cost. Nina teaches that dignity is not something given by status or money, but something you defend, even when the system expects your silence. True courage is not loud or dramatic. It is the quiet decision to stand beside what is right, even when you might stand alone. And sometimes, the most dangerous paths are not the ones forced upon us, but the ones we choose fully aware of the risks because we refuse to live without truth, respect, and the chance to change what is unfair. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.